Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 56. Today's episode of the podcast is an interview with San Francisco Bay Area attorney and business advisor John Corcoran on the subject of speechwriting. After working as a scriptwriter in Hollywood, John went on to write speeches for President Bill Clinton and California Governor Gray Davis. Now he's being interviewed by the Communication Diva. How much higher will you rise, John Corcoran? How much higher?
Hi, I'm Jen Swanson, creator and host of the Communication Diva podcast, where I interview fascinating people, explore communication problems, offer tips and insights to help you improve your communication, lessen your conflict, and take your interpersonal relations both at work or at home to a deeper level. And today I'm going to bring you an interview that I recorded earlier with attorney and writer and business owner John Corcoran about his experience as a speechwriter in both the White House and with the governor of California. And we met at New Media Expo, and I thought, oh, here's somebody that I think you might be interested in listening to and finding out more about. And both because of his experience writing speeches for other people and his business that he's running, where he helps people to further their own small businesses. So if you're interested in speech writing, if you have to give a speech, if you are a small business owner and just want to learn more about John and what he does, or need a business attorney, I guess, you can hopefully get some value out of this next interview. And the other thing about John is he's a great storyteller. So he tells lots of stories about his adventures over the years. Before I do that, I wanted to let you know that we have a new feature on the Communication Diva website at www.communicationdiva.com. If you look at the website over on the right-hand side, there's a little black button that says send a message or send a voicemail. And so this is a feature I'm trying out for the next month called SpeakPipe. And it's a way that you would be able to click on that and send me a voice message. And what you can do is record it straight from your device or your computer. It doesn't have a very long time frame, so you can't talk for, 10 minutes or anything. But if you would like to leave some feedback verbally, audio format, if you would like to ask a question, or if you would like to just say hello, or let me know what topics you're interested in, or if you wanted to say you are listening to the Communication Diva podcast with Jen Swanson, then you may end up hearing yourself on a subsequent podcast. So if you'd like to do that, rather than sending me an email or any comment or something, I would be happy to have this new feature tested out. I haven't had any messages yet. But I'm hoping that I will hear from one or two of you at least in the next month, and I will try and get that out there. They only last for a few days, I think, and I am out of town yet again next week. We are on our way to a retreat center just outside of Chicago, Illinois, to sit with and learn from the amazing Richard Rohr. That's Rohr. And Richard Rohr is a prolific author. He is a Franciscan priest, and he is just a fascinating person to learn from. And so my husband and I are going down there to hopefully meet Richard and to hear some of his teachings for some of the work that he is doing. So I'm very excited about that. It's a different way to spend Valentine's Day, but hey, why not? And so then it's a 3-day retreat, so I'll only be gone for a little while, but we'll be back to talk to you and hopefully I can share some of what I've learned when I talk to you next. So, without anything further, let us get on to this interview. So here I am via Skype with John Corcoran, and John and I met in a taxi cab at New Media Expo in Las Vegas in January. And I think it was a very fortunate encounter because we were all coming back from some event where we had to go back to the hotel we were staying at, and we stood in the lobby for a long time talking, and that is when I discovered that John has had a very interesting past as far as communication goes. And I wanted to say welcome, John, and how are you doing?
Good, good. And all good relationships start in a taxi cab, back of a taxi cab. So
Absolutely.
I'm
There you go.
glad we met that way. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Great. So, one of the things that struck me when we were standing there talking was you mentioned that you had been a speechwriter in the speechwriting office of the White House. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I was a writer in presidential letters and messages, which is kind of like a second tier speechwriter. We're kind of like second string. And so we wrote I basically say everything that the speechwriters didn't want to write, like video scripts, messages, proclamations, letters to VIPs, that kind of thing. At least that's the way it was set up then. Now it could be set up a little bit differently.
Right. So your responsibility was to not the main speech writing, but some of the other stuff that needed to be done, but couldn't be done by the people that were supposed to be signing it.
Right, or the people who are, drafting the State of the Union were, going to work on the Proclamation or something like that. I later was a speechwriter for the governor of California, which we can talk about later. And I started off as an intern in the White House speechwriting office. That's how I first got my in there.
Right. And you said that you did that right before the whole Monica Lewinsky thing happened.
That's right. Yeah. So it was fall of 1997 during the Clinton administration, and it was you're not paid. We got school credit for it. I was in school and university at the time, and we work your butt off all week long, really long hours and everything. And one kind of funny anecdote is they told all the interns when we started, you guys need to understand how important a role you play here. It's really critical. You play a big role. It's very important. You're doing things for the president. In fact, during the government shutdown, all the interns were running the place because the employees couldn't come in. Only the interns could come in and operate the White House. So they literally the government was functioning because of them. Well, turns out we found out a number of months later that that's actually how the Lewinsky situation happened, was because during the government shutdown, an inappropriate relationship started between President Clinton and Ms. Lewinsky. But it's kind of funny that they were giving that as an example when we started.
And you were being interviewed, or people wanted to interview you after all of that broke, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So it broke, like I got right back. I was back at school, and like around the same week, the whole thing broke. It was beginning of January 1998, and I had NBC News and CBS and LA Times and New York Times were all calling my house, and my roommates were like, "You're getting all these phone calls here." And they told us that you can't talk about your experience. So they didn't know what would happen, but they said you can't really. It's not appropriate. They ask you to not talk about it. So I didn't.
Of course.
So,
Did you have to sign some kind of a non-disclosure statement?
boy, I don't really remember at this point. I don't think we did. I think it was more just they didn't want us really talking about it.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, there's a lot of the stuff is public knowledge by this point.
yeah, that makes sense. So that must have been an interesting experience, though, to be there. You wrote a joke for President Clinton.
Yeah, so that was probably the highlight for me. I finally, after being there about 3 months, they gave me responsibility to write a speech, and it was for the college basketball national champs, the men's and women's teams. It was University of Arizona and Tennessee were the two teams that had won the previous March, and so the two of them came to visit the White House because all these sports teams come through and visit the White House. And actually, there was a guy there he was in public affairs. This guy had the coolest job in the world. Job was you go into his office and he had ESPN on, he had a basketball hoop, he had all these sports posters, and at least at the time, his job was to brief the president on sports related things. And President Clinton was a huge sports fan, so they just like, talked about sports when they would get together. And he like kept in touch with different sports teams, and there's more of a job to it than that. I mean, it's public affairs is interfacing with the public. So anyway, these two teams come, and I wrote the speech for the president in the East Room of the White House when they came. And the joke wasn't a really funny joke, but it was something along the lines of Tennessee had won back to back, and this was fall of '97, so it was after Bill Clinton and Al Gore had just won back to back. Al Gore was from Tennessee, and he made some kind of joke about, Al and I know how hard it is to win back to back. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah. So who checks out what you've done if you're writing as an intern? Are there guidelines that you have to follow when you're writing for someone else to say something? And how does that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, the best thing you can do is get in their head and just by listening to them speak as much as possible. So, then and also when I was a speechwriter for the governor of California, you just listen to them speak as much as possible in public speeches and try and just absorb their manner of speaking, the words that they use, the way they would describe something. So you get a real feel for how they talk. One of the really cool things about being an intern in the speechwriting office is anytime there was a public event with the president speaking, we had a great excuse to go because we wanted to go to absorb him talking so that we could help with the speeches. And then the editing process, there were a bunch of speechwriters on staff. There was a chief speechwriter and a couple of about 6 or so speechwriters, I think, and about maybe 3 foreign policy speechwriters. And, it's a normal editing process. They, give you feedback. If you were completely off on something, you'd have to change it. This was a lower priority speech because of some sports teams coming to the White House. It wasn't the State of the Union.
Right, right. So by the end of it, though, even for a normal little speech, how many people have worked on the said speech?
Ordinarily there'd be one speechwriter who was really responsible for it, and depending on their level of seniority, and how important the speech was, they'd usually knock out a draft, and then sometimes there'd be a meeting with the president to talk about the draft, and sometimes not. And sometimes he'd just go with it. And Bill Clinton was very good at ad-libbing, so he'd go on and off the script. But for the normal speechwriters, there's the chief speechwriter who'd do the editing, and then if it was a higher priority speech, then there's other people like the chief of staff or deputy chief of staff who'd maybe weigh in. And then there's also policy people as well who didn't really do textual editing of the speech, but they check facts and support it with statistics, that kind of thing.
Wow, so it's a long, complicated process. So how many days would it take to write something that was maybe not super high level speaking?
Well, I remember that one that I did. I spent all weekend on it, and it was a little thing because I'd been there for 2 months at that point or something, and I really wanted to do well. And it was really important to me. I was really excited about having been given the opportunity. And then another kind of funny story. So I spent all weekend working on it. I came in, working on it. I'm not getting paid or anything.
Right.
And then I think the speech was on a Monday or Tuesday or something like that. And I went down with my supervisor from the speechwriting office to the Oval Office beforehand, because thinking we're going to have a meeting in the Oval Office to talk about the speech beforehand. And I had memorized every statistic about University of Arizona and Tennessee basketball going back 50 years. I'm exaggerating, but I'd really done my research because I didn't know what he was going to ask me, and he's a basketball fan. We're standing outside the Oval Office with Betty Curry, who was his secretary, waiting to be called in, and there the door of the Oval Office opens a little bit, and he's in there, and I see him talking with some people. And then finally, one of his assistants just came out and just kind of whispered to my supervisor, and they said, well, he's not feeling too well. We don't need to meet today. So we left. So it was a little anticlimactic.
But you got pretty darn close. So what would be, in your opinion, the key components to a really good speech?
Good question. Well, I mean, the saying about writing good speech is, you tell them what you're going to say, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you just said. So that's important. But you also want to be memorable. And there's a great book by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick, which you're probably familiar with. I wish that book had been around years ago when I was working on this, because it really talks about how an idea resonates, and gets through to an audience. These days, you want to get on television. That's an important element. If you're talking to a room full of 100 people or 1,000 people, those people might get your message. But if you really want to convey your message, and there are reporters there, as there usually are on TV cameras, as there usually are for a president or a governor or a senator, you need to really say something that's going to be memorable. And so that means saying something in a cute or clever way, or making an analogy or a joke, those sorts of things that are more going to be more quotable and more likely to get you on the news. So you definitely want to have that there and keep people entertained. I mean, it's oftentimes your audience is standing, or they've been waiting around for a while for the president to show up or governor to show up, or whoever, anyone. They're giving their time to you, no matter who the speaker is. And so, they deserve to be given, and persuaded and entertained.
Right. And so does the context, I guess, would make a big difference as to the language you use, who your audience is.
Right. If you're talking to a third graders, that's one thing. If you're talking to a bunch of members of Congress, that's something different entirely. So one of the difficulties with speech writing is it's kind of like being a teacher. You're speaking to different levels in the room. There's some people who get it. They're up here. There's some people who've never heard of the concept before. If you're talking about some concept like climate change or the debt ceiling or something like that, you need to be able to talk about it so you don't sound so advanced that people don't understand what you're talking about, and you're not boiling it down to such simple terms that half the audience saying, I've heard this before, or this is way too simplistic, or I'm not getting anything out of this. So, just one of the challenges, especially for a leader or someone who talks about the topic frequently, is keeping it new, keeping it fresh, finding new ways to talk about it and make it newsworthy as well.
Mm-hmm. And you were working for the governor's office in California, and do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So I worked for the guy who got called by Arnold Schwarzenegger before Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected. I left the White House in the midst of the Florida recount battle when Al Gore and George W. Bush were battling it out. Literally got in the car and was driving west as they were recounting the votes, and I didn't know who would be the next president. But I'd gotten a job back in California, which is where I was from. I wanted to return to California. I wanted to make it to San Francisco, but Sacramento was as far as I could get. But it was a good opportunity. At the time, he was an up-and-coming governor, and so that was really exciting. It was I worked with some great people. I got to learn about some amazing issues. California is, I want to say, like the 6th or 7th largest economy if it was a separate economy, 6th or 7th largest economy in the world. Huge in agriculture, huge in entertainment. You got Silicon Valley, you got San Francisco, you got Los Angeles. And so there's such a diverse array of issues. And I got, the privilege of working with really smart policy people who would explain to me how these complex policy issues, what they mean and how to understand them. And then I'd take that and try and make it understandable to an audience and to the general public. So it was really exciting. So I left in the midst of the recount in Florida. A week or two after I got to Sacramento, we were hit with rolling blackouts. I don't know if you remember, but California had this major energy crisis.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff. And so that started like right after I got there. And it was a crash course in learning about energy policy, which bored people to tears. To this, I mean, even when we were experiencing rolling blackouts, you'd start talking with someone about what the causes were and everything, and no one wanted to. It was so boring. It was so difficult to. That was a real communication difficulty is explaining the origins and the solutions and what we needed to do in a creative and novel way.
And how did you do that?
Well, what we ended up doing mostly was that what we were trying to convey to people, because there was real despair. I mean, people really felt like, oh my gosh, and this was before 9/11, but it was 2000, and then the dot-com bubble was bursting, and people were really distressed about it, as they would be. We were really concerned about whether there's going to be a solution. So it was important to convey to people that that a solution was in the works and that we were trying to solve the problem. And so the way we did that was often through visuals. So anytime there was a power plant that was opening, even if it was a tiny little power plant, we'd be there with the governor and with other officials and do some kind of event like a ribbon cutting or something like that, and convey on the news. You'd see a picture of the governor walking across in front of this power plant that was about to come online. And it didn't make, in terms of reality, it didn't make that much of a difference. What would have made a bigger difference was to have the governor in his office working out a political solution or policy solution, but that doesn't convey. That does not convey to people who are sitting at home watching the news. They're sitting at home and they're saying, "What is he doing about it?" But I don't think he's doing anything, because they don't see the visual.
So it's all about perception in that case.
Right. Absolutely. So, you have to figure out what message would get this across in a visual way. In a lot of ways, these messages are only communicated through visuals, and and find a way to convey that.
So it's the kissing babies thing.
Right, something like that. Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, kissing babies, politicians and kissing babies, that conveys a message to you that this politician is human and accessible and a nice guy, and that's what we want in our leaders. And so that's a good analogy, I guess.
We had one of our prime ministers here who always wore a sweater, and that became a bit of a national. People would get a giggle over the sweater because it was supposed to convey something about being more relaxed and less formal. And so, yeah, it is about perception and making it accessible to people as well, because like you say, a lot of this would be probably either confusing, boring, and what about the age groups? Like, do you try and reach a particular age group when you're writing these speeches, or I know President Obama was really trying to get the younger vote the first time around with a lot of the social media stuff.
Yeah, and that's, if I was writing speeches today, I know it would be a very different manner, because you're communicating through Twitter and Facebook, and you want to get those things shared, and that's a whole different means of communicating. So yeah, it depends on what the issue you're talking about. But the other thing that makes a big difference in terms of communication is what issues you choose to talk about. So if you're going to talk to, say you're going to go to UCLA and talk to 500, you're going to be very selective in what issues you're going to choose to talk about. And it doesn't even matter really the ways in which you communicate it with, if you pick the wrong issues to talk about, or pick too many issues to talk about. There's some key decision points that have to be made. And oftentimes a struggle that we engaged in was keeping issues out of a speech, because if you crowd it with too many different issues, if you show up and just read a laundry list of different things, people aren't going to remember anything. Versus if you show up and talk about a few distinct issues, it's going to be more memorable to them.
Yeah, that would make sense. I'm just trying to see if I can shut my video off here, because I'm getting you cutting out every once in a while here. And I think it could be that. So that was UCLA and talking to 500 graduates. I missed that part, but yeah. Yeah, so you're right, because if you try and communicate everything all at once, then people will get confused, overwhelmed, and not remember much of it, I would imagine.
Right, absolutely, yeah, and so then there are big speeches like the State of the Union and the State of the State, and mayors do State of the City, which are big annual speeches that are done to talk about major policy initiatives, and they usually get a lot more people watching them and paying attention to it, and it's a real battle to pick what topics you're going to talk about and which topics you're not going to talk about, because you're going to have different factions within the support staff, within the aides, within different constituencies that really, really want you to highlight a particular issue, and others that don't. And so you've got to balance the political issues, and you got to balance the communication issues. And a lot of times speechwriters are right at the forefront of that, because you're the guardian of the speech. You're just trying to get a good speech across. And oftentimes you have people that are many levels above you, like the chief of staff or deputy chiefs of staff or cabinet secretaries, that are trying to put some pressure on you in order to get you to include certain things in a speech draft.
And does the person actually offering the speech have any say?
Sure, yeah, depending on the level of priority for the speech. So, I mentioned like the State of the State speech, which the governors give, which is usually done like at the beginning of a legislative session, and it's delivered in the legislative house, like President Obama does it in Congress before the House of Representatives and the senators, and the governors do it in front of the legislatures. And it depends on how high priority it is and how busy they are, but they may practice multiple different times. They probably do. I mean, it would be kind of foolhardy not to practice multiple times for that level of speech. And then for other speeches, it really depends on how busy they are and how important the speech is.
Yeah, because one of the things I've noticed about President Obama is how beautifully he gives a speech. I mean, he doesn't appear even to be reading it. So I don't know if he memorizes it, but there's probably a teleprompter there somewhere. But it always sounds like it's coming from himself, and that it's just coming from the heart. And I wonder how many on a team of speechwriters go in to make the speeches that he gives.
And a lot of that is just, he's a masterful orator. He's got a great voice. He's very smart to begin with. And he, as far as I understand, also plays a very close role in drafting a lot of these speeches. I'm actually reading his first book, Dreams of My Father, because he wrote that, I'm not sure what year he wrote it, probably 2004 or 2003 or something like that. Or maybe even earlier, and the voice of what we hear now when he gives a lot of his high-profile speeches is very similar to the voice that was in that book, because he's very true to himself. So I think that's it starts really with the speaker. If they are an articulate individual who has a lot of good ideas and knows how to express themselves clearly and is intimately involved in drafting the speech, or drafted it themselves, maybe with a little bit of help from speechwriters, then that goes a long way towards making it a successful speech.
Yeah, and he also has a really good sense of timing too in the delivery of it. So yeah.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he's a masterful speaker. He really is.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the highlights of your experience, you said, was the Thanksgiving Proclamation in 1999.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was really cool. So we drafted proclamations, we drafted messages, we drafted video messages recorded by the president, we drafted letters to VIPs, and the Thanksgiving Proclamation is something that's been delivered going all the way back to George Washington. Back then it was probably sitting down, George Washington, right? But as the presidency has gotten larger and they've gotten busier, then they brought people in to draft them. And so I was tasked with drafting that. And I first went back and looked at the history of it and found out that, in the depths of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln's proclamation had really been credited by historians as helping to really unify the nation at a time of very deep despair. And this was back, this was a time when we didn't have TV, we didn't have magazines, we didn't have the internet, obviously, but we had newspapers. And so something like that, a proclamation, would be printed in the newspaper and people would read it, and so it really made a difference. And then also I read about Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the midst of the Depression had issued a proclamation that similarly had really inspired a lot of people who were really downtrodden at the time. And so there's this long history of this proclamation. It felt a lot of pressure on me, even though in modern days time people don't pay as much attention to them in spite of the history to it. So I put a lot of effort into it. Obviously, it was a team. There's a lot of teamwork. There's a number of editors. And so I wasn't the only one who was involved in it. But a couple of years ago, I saw that I think it was the LA Times published a piece that ranked, this was right around Thanksgiving, said the 10 greatest presidential Thanksgiving proclamations of all time. And for whatever reason, that proclamation, Bill Clinton's 1999 Thanksgiving proclamation, was on the list.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah. So,
And then I hear that you also ended up in Hollywood somehow.
yeah. I've had a roundabout career, I guess. Yeah. That was after college. So I went during college. When I was interning in the speechwriting office. Then I came back, graduated. I only had about 6 months left. Graduated from college, and then I went and worked in the entertainment industry for, I think, about 6 months or so, working for a couple different studios, including DreamWorks, which is the one founded by Steven Spielberg. Mostly in administrative support. I was trying to work my way up on the development side.
So you were working in Hollywood, and you mentioned working near the West Wing in the White House. What about the show, The West Wing?
Yeah, so there's kind of a funny story about that. So when I was working at the White House, because I had connections in Hollywood, I had a friend or someone who knew Aaron Sorkin, who was the creator of The West Wing. At the time, he'd written American President, which was a great movie, which I really enjoyed. And I knew I'd actually read a copy of the script for the pilot for The West Wing, and so I knew this movie was coming down the pike, and it hadn't been on the air yet when I started working at the White House. So this mutual friend put us in touch. I ended up having a number of discussions over email with Aaron Sorkin about what it was like working at the White House, which was really cool to think that I was contributing in some small way to the show. Of course, after the show made it on the air, it was a huge hit, and he had all these well-known names who were advising him on, including Peggy Noonan and others who were advising him on what it was like working at the White House. So I didn't communicate with him as much after that, but I sent him a copy of the 1999 Thanksgiving proclamation. And the funny thing was, I sent it to him, and then the next year they had a Thanksgiving episode of The West Wing, and a big plot point in that episode was Rob Lowe was drafting the Thanksgiving proclamation. I think it was Rob Lowe. Part of the plot. And so I guess, I was being played by Rob Lowe, maybe.
Wow, that's exciting.
Anyways, so that was a big part of, they had to get it done in time. And so that was really cool. And then at the very end of that episode, President Bartlett, played by Martin Sheen, is walking out of the Oval Office, and he looks down and he's got the draft of the proclamation, and he says something inspirational about it. I forget exactly what it was. And he read a quote from the proclamation, the fictional proclamation that the fictional president was doing in the TV show The West Wing, but it was a part of a sentence that was in the proclamation that I drafted. Wow. They just directly. So that was really cool seeing that. So yeah, that was one of the cool perks that you get.
So you never know what all of the work that you have done in the past will, where it will show up or what influence it will have in the future.
Yeah, it's kind of fun seeing it, after the fact, seeing the influence that you can have. I had kept in touch with people at the White House and found out that this writer job in presidential letters and messages had opened up. This was around June of 1999, and I jumped on it. It was exciting to go back to Washington. It was after the impeachment and the trial in the Senate after the impeachment had happened, and so it was definitely the end of President Clinton's term. But I was there for almost 2 years or so, and I was 23 years old, and I was a paid writer, which is unheard of.
It's amazing.
So I'd been an English major in college, and I have always loved writing, and so I was definitely excited about it. And I knew, even though I was paid a pittance, that it would pay off in the long run in just cocktail fodder. It was really cool. I mean, even though my job it's kind of toiling away in an office, writing letters and writing proclamations and writing messages, so it wasn't as interactive as I like. I prefer being able to interact with human beings rather than being stuck in an office. But it was amazing. I mean, we were in the old executive office building, which is right next to the West Wing. And, sometimes I'd go to the restroom, and I'd be stopped by Secret Service because there was a crowd of 50 people. And this is in the hallways of the old executive office building. And there's, President Clinton talking with the premier of China and, lecturing him on something completely behind the scenes, and just seeing something that was just tremendous. And then, of course, going and seeing other types of public events, whether in the Rose Garden or on the South Lawn or going to the Easter egg roll. I also did advance for one trip that President Clinton did to Michigan, and that advance is like event planning. Like you go fly into a city beforehand, help with setting up logistics, renting cars, scouting out the location, that kind of thing. Obviously, it's a huge team of people anytime the president goes anywhere. So I did that as well. And then it ended up leading to my job as a speechwriter in the governor's office in California. So it worked out well. So I was really glad I did it.
Did you ever get to meet the president when you were there?
Yeah, I've met President Clinton a number of times, shook his hand a number of times. I've met President Obama as well. And, President Clinton has incredible charisma. You hear people tell these stories about meeting him and how they were just drawn to him. And it's totally true. I never met him before he was president, but I heard that he was like this before also. He just has an ability when he's in a room full of people to draw attention onto him and enticed by him. And he's just, he's not it's not like he's a stand-up comedian. He's not the funniest storyteller ever. But he just has a way of engaging with people, locking eye contact with people, shaking your hand, petting your dog, does all that, and you just walk away going, well, what a nice guy, and it's amazing. And then President Obama, who I helped his campaign a little bit in 2007, 2008 when he was running. I saw him when he was in the Senate, and it was in the midst of the primary, and he's got a different kind of charisma. It's definitely more of a self-assurance. You can definitely tell he's the leader in the room, even before he was president. When he was a senator, he, even though he was, I think, struggling at that time, and Hillary Clinton was getting a lot of attention, he marched into that room, had confidence, gave a great speech, talked about all kinds of issues in a very articulate way, and was very clear that he was a kind of a born leader.
Great communicator, both of them.
Yeah, they're both really good communicators in different ways. But it starts with both being brilliant minds. I mean, they went to Yale Law School, Harvard Law School. Both really intelligent individuals, and can. But that's only half of it, because when it comes to communicating, one half is understanding it, the other half is conveying it. Because if you understand it 100%, but you can't convey it to the next person, then you're useless. So, and there's been lots of very smart presidential candidates, people who believe they are entitled to become president. They never got elected because they weren't able to communicate their vision or their ideas to someone else or to the nation. And so I think all of our presidents have an ability to do that, and that's why we elect them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I think communication and the ability to do so is, well, of course, I think it's key, but I think it's key for everybody, which is why we're having this conversation. Wow, it sounds like you've had a great career, and I want to bring us to what you're doing now.
So what I'm doing now is probably pretty boring by comparison. So I ended up after politics, after I'd been doing that for a number of years, I went back to law school and became a lawyer. And the reason I went to law school is because I was working around a lot of lawyers and people who had law degrees, and I saw they were very smart, and I was often in meetings with them, and they were the ones who won arguments. And I thought, well, maybe I should go to law school. And so I didn't necessarily know that I was going to practice law, but I knew that I wanted a law degree because I thought it would be useful, and it has been. It really gives you a great understanding of how the world works in a way that I wish I'd had at the beginning of my career. And so I did that, and I worked for a couple of different law firms for a couple of years. I was involved in politics locally a little bit, but not as much anymore. And started my own law firm about a year and a half ago, and I've been doing that since then, and been getting more involved online, doing things online, and that's how you and I met at the New Media Expo.
Right. So you've got a website and a blog, and now you're podcasting too. You're just a man of many talents.
Yeah. I enjoy the podcasting. It's a lot of fun. So I've got a blog called Smart Business Revolution. My law practice, most of my clients are entrepreneurs or small business owners. And so I started sharing some of the things that I learned from working with entrepreneurs every day on my blog. And then I also branched it out and started talking about my journey, starting my own, going out to work myself a year and a half ago, and the ups and downs of that, what I've done right, what I've done wrong. And so I write about that on Smart Business Revolution. And then I started a podcast where I interview interesting entrepreneurs about how they've been successful, what they've done right and what they've done wrong. And I've been really fortunate. I've interviewed Doug Lebda, who started LendingTree.com, and Dan Pink, who's a real hero of mine. He's a great author, wrote Drive and To Sell Is Human. Guy Kawasaki. It's podcasting is a lot of fun. I'd recommend it to anyone because it's a great way to interview people you'd like to meet.
Absolutely. And I am a firm believer in it, and I love the form of communication too, because you get more, I think, more than on the written page by listening to a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully people listening have gotten something out of this. So.
I'm sure they have. If people wanted to reach you or find out more about you, John, where would they do that?
Well, they can find me at smartbusinessrevolution.com. It's probably the best way to find me. You can also look on iTunes and find the podcast there. All my contact info on there as well. I'm also on Twitter, twitter.com, John Corcoran. It's JohnCorcoran. But you can, I'm sure you'll have that in the show notes also.
Yeah, I will post everything in the show notes. Excellent. So if you had one piece of advice for somebody who had to offer a speech, what would that be?
Well, it's well known that public speaking is a lot of people get very nervous. Some of the surveys say the joke is that people would rather, if they're at a funeral, they'd rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. So I would say practice, really. A lot of times people's reaction to being nervous about giving a speech is to put it off or to wing it, and that's just going to make it worse. The best thing you can do is practice, and practice it out loud, practice it to friends. Just do it as many times as you can, as long as you have time to do it beforehand. And then also to get practiced at doing it. So if you have to do a big speech, you have one coming up, there's Toastmasters, there's other ways to get out there and to practice speaking. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you will be with giving a speech.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to put all of your contact info and all of that on the website at www.communicationdiva.com. So thank you very much, John.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. I really enjoyed it.
So So thank you very much for listening to this episode 56 of the Communication Diva podcast. I'm Jen Swanson. I hope you enjoyed that and that you will let me know if you have any ideas for future episodes, what your thoughts are on this or any other topic related to communication, or just even to come over and say hello. So have a wonderful week. I will talk to you when I'm back from my excursion to Chicago. And until then, I wish you all wonderful conversations, lots of sunshine, and lots of good rest as well. Take good care.